Hey, thank you for joining us today on Confession Box.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just going to ask you to start out just with a basic introduction for yourself, and then I know you have brought a story to tell with us today, but we'll wait for a moment to get to that. So just an introduction. Who are you?
My name is Emily Redden. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, but I'm currently based in Atlanta, Georgia. I kind of have done a lot of jobs, but right now I'm a performer, singer, voice teacher, just do a lot of things. So.
Right, excellent. Well, welcome. So when we talk about telling our stories, one way I like to think about it is sort of the past, the present, and the future. And so let me ask you to share anything you would like to about the past in terms of the story that you're telling us today.
Past. Well, growing up, I was generally a tomboy, and I think I experienced some of the stereotypical gender expectations at a really young age from other people, not from my family. Generally, that wasn't really part of the conversation. But girls can't do chin-ups, or girls can't be good at math, or whatever else, and that led to some changes in schools, or me proving people wrong. I did get pretty obstinate a lot of the times. I remember there was a summer camp where there was some kid, we were 7, and he said something about, girls can't do chin-ups or whatever. And then I did it all summer. And then we had this big competition at the end of the camp, 8 weeks later. And I think the counselors got in on it too. And I creamed him, I'm not gonna lie. And it was a big moment for me. And so I mean, throughout my life, I've had just things like that, and mostly to do with strength, but also interests. My sibling was similar, they loved bugs, and they're non-binary now, but they were femme presenting at the time, and they loved bugs and having shorter hair and doing they did tech work, so they were working on sets and stuff like that. And so I mean, generally we weren't raised with a lot of those gendered expectations, but we did get them from the outside world a lot, and we usually kind of face them head on and all of that. But more the present and future, I found what's interesting.
Let me just pause a second, because then we can. Gotcha. I still want to ask you a question about the past. No, it's fine. It's fine. So in terms of the past, first of all, with our audience, wide variety of audience. So not everyone out there may understand a term that you used, which is non-binary. Would you just give a brief explanation of that?
Yeah, so non-binary refers to the binary of gender in most of our society, which is male-female. So non-binary means they don't identify with either. There's also gender fluid, which is somebody who can kind of go between, but my sibling is just not switching back and forth, but is more just don't. So they use the pronouns they, them. And we've changed certain words like sibling, and they're actually a parent, so they are mo instead of a gendered parent term. Things like that. So it just means you don't identify with either of the binaries of gender construct.
Exactly. Thank you. And you mentioned that you came from a family where typical gender stereotyping was not so much of an issue. Do you feel like telling a little bit more maybe about your family or their own how do you think your parents became that way, or just a little bit more about them?
I honestly think a lot of it was because at the time we were both femme presenting, and so there wasn't that comparison. I think if we had had a brother, there would have been some more obvious differences in rules or dress or colors or just expectations in a relationship. When dating in high school was a certain age, up until a certain age, you couldn't be out alone with a boy unless a parent was there, and then like couldn't ever be alone at home. And some people, that's how they are with all of their kids, but it was like every boy we would date, their parents didn't have the same expectations necessarily, but that ours did. And I didn't feel like it was a parenting difference. I felt like it was a gendered difference. But otherwise, I mean, my family is filled with very strong-willed women. My grandma was the first person to go to college in her family, and she went to Berea College in Kentucky, which was one of the first to admit women in the country, I think, and was one of the first to admit people of color in the country as well. So she was going to school in like the 50s with a few African American students and women. And so I think a lot of it came from that. I don't know, I do think a big part of it was the lack of comparison, but my dad has always preferred to be around women generally, I think, and so he was very excited to, coach our sports teams and just be there. And he's a performer, so it's not like he was totally uninterested in that aspect of what we did growing up. I think it just kind of worked out that way. We honestly didn't have a lot of conversations about gender roles until the last few years when my sibling was like coming out as non-binary. Because before that it was just like, yeah, it's just definitely like everyone in my family is definitely like proclaimed feminist. So that was never a question.
So moving on then to present, how does having that history affect your present? And perhaps this is the time that you're going to sort of start sharing your story with us.
Lloyd, I call him my partner. He is actually gender fluid at this point. So when we were going through, we've been together for about a little over 7 years, but when we were, going through the beginnings of our relationship, he hadn't kind of developed this understanding of himself yet, and he's fine with any pronouns, just so everyone knows. But so there were just things about him as a person or him within our relationship that people were constantly trying to comment on or control or decide, where they would never do the same things to me because they don't want to be sexist. But they weren't giving him the same choices, which I found so odd. And it was everything from the length of his hair to what pattern was on his clothing or what color his water bottle was, like just ridiculous things that was like, do you not hear how stupid you sound, basically, like how hypocritical. Yeah, people would, and it was funny too, because when they would just make assumptions or ask questions and we would respond in a non-aggressive way, but it made it pretty obvious like that was an unfair assumption to make. People would get really uncomfortable and mad because we weren't like, that's really uncool, that's sexist or whatever. It was just like when people would assume he had my water bottle because it was pink, and they'd be like, why do you have Emily's water bottle? And he was like, oh no, it's mine. And he wasn't mad, but then they would all of a sudden be like, oh, and be really uncomfortable because they realized what they had done. And it was just little things like that constantly. People just, it was just a lot of stuff like that. And it was interesting that I kind of had to be almost an ally to him when usually those roles are reversed, of defending him or, just pointing out how if it had been switched, it wouldn't have been a big deal. Like no one would say anything if I had a blue water bottle or a green water bottle or a black water bottle. They wouldn't assume it was Lloyd's. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
You referred to people making certain kinds of comments or being confused about certain things. And I was just asking for some clarification. Are these people friends, family, strangers, or all of the above?
Yeah, so generally all of the above. Yeah, it was kind of all-encompassing. But it was mostly from people we saw in our daily lives, which we were together for almost 6 years in school, high school, college. And so it was a lot of our classmates, castmates, teachers, even people we didn't know super well who were kind of, in that world. Yeah, and it was frustrating when it was coming from so many different places and when it was just commentary that on things that don't affect them, like people having problems with the length of his hair or, and he would usually have to cut it for a show or a certain role or whatever, but then when he grew it out because that's what he likes, it's not affecting you. You don't need to comment on it every time. And it made it worse when he did have to cut it for a show because then people would comment on that and how that was better or finally or like you figured out how to, get a haircut and stuff like that. It was just so much passive aggressive behavior that was clearly people who were uncomfortable with how he chose to express himself or live his life.
With the various things you've been talking about, so far we've heard about external forces kind of commenting on and impacting. How did this, or does it, affect your relationship?
The only thing I would say negatively that I can think of is it's definitely caused issues with Lloyd's perception of himself within our relationship, like me not finding him attractive or me wanting a more masculine presence in our relationship, which, I grew up with that very, tailored concept of what romance was and what I should be attracted to, because that's all you see is this very repetitive representation in the media and in movies and books of like how romance works and what women find attractive in men or in other people. And so I can't say I was totally immune to that. Like there are stereotypes that I'm attracted to. But by the time like any of this was happening, we'd been together so long, I'm not sure what our relationship would have been if, we were meeting now. I feel like we would be really, really close. I just don't know. I don't know if we would have ended up in a romantic relationship, because that's hard to say. But at the time, we were both very attracted to each other, and then that grew into a deeper love. And then, by the time those were even concerns, it wasn't a concern anymore, because we had many, many layers to our relationship that add to your attraction to a person.
Can you clarify just a little bit there when you said, so if you met now, perhaps you wouldn't have the same attraction or something? Can you just clarify a bit more what you mean with that?
So it's a weird thing to think about, because it's not that I don't find Lloyd attractive. It's just that more of what I find attractive in him is him, like him as a person. Although that's generally, I feel like if I, was still in the dating world now, I might have a different understanding of my own sexuality. Like I might be pansexual or something like that. Pansexual is when you're, trying to make sure I don't say this wrong. I believe it's when you kind of fall in love with individuals, mostly based on personality rather than specifically like bisexual, gay, straight, one or the other. It's more like you just fall in love with people regardless of all of that. So I feel like it probably would have been more like that rather than like, hey, you're cute. Oh, you think I'm cute? Okay, maybe we should date, So, because that's more how it started, was we flirted a lot and we were both attracted to each other, and then we, started spending all of our time together and became best friends, and then became, like life partners, and now we're here. So I just don't know that, I don't know. I do think we would be close if we met now, because we would just, we are still best friends. I just don't know how far it would go, because I don't know, I haven't explored my own attraction to other people much in the last 7 years. So it's hard to say, but I try not to dwell on those things too much because ultimately that's not the case. So we're here now, and that's all that really matters.
Do you all talk about having your own children / family in that way? And if so, based on everything you've learned in your life up to this point, how would you plan on raising them?
When you start to follow any kind of like common path or tradition with society, people then have other expectations. So because we did actually get married and we weren't just like life partners forever, that's the next question, you know, and that's the next expectation. So it's like as soon as you follow one step, they expect the next 10. I don't know if we'll ever have kids, but it's not something I'm like, definitely not. I think it's way more likely we'll adopt or foster than for me to have my own kid. But it's just like definitely not right now, and we'll see in the future if we change our minds.
What could give hope to youth out there who might be struggling, who might be watching this, and or parents, families who might be trying to raise youth who have some of the same feelings and identities early on in their lives that you have grown up with?
Have that support system. Really just have that support system. And for parents, this will be more difficult for people who've already had their kids be born, but I think you're gonna set yourself up for failure if you have expectations. And that doesn't mean like you want your kids to stay out of jail and not do drugs. It just means like I hate going to gender reveal parties or even baby showers because they are so gendered. It's crazy. And I'm like, your baby isn't even born yet, and you're deciding what color she's gonna like and what she's gonna do and what her personality is gonna be. And when people give personalities to babies, they're like, oh, she's so sassy. And I'm like, she's 6 months old. Like, you don't know. And people do that throughout a kid's life, and I feel like, you know, they then decide that this kid is bossy or this kid is a troublemaker, and teachers do it, and you know, family does it, and I feel like it completely stagnates their growth and their development. Like even now, I think my own parents don't fully recognize how I have changed since I was like 16 or 17, and so they still make jokes or like make assumptions about things I will do or how I feel because they haven't, you know, I haven't changed in their minds since I was like 16. And that doesn't like detrimentally damage me, but just the amount of expectation that I feel like a lot of parents have when dreaming about their kids from the time before they even have kids and throughout their pregnancy and when they're a baby and then like throughout their whole childhood, it's terrifyingly insane. And I feel like you're just setting yourself up to be disappointed or to have a kid that can't truly be themselves, no matter what that ends up being, but especially if it's something that might make you uncomfortable. Ultimately, as a parent, I would hope you truly just want your child to be happy, healthy. Sometimes healthy is too much to ask for, honestly. So you just be lucky that you have a kid who is happy and healthy.
Thank you. As we get ready to move over to the confession box, is there anything that you haven't had a chance to say that you had intended to today? And is there anything else you'd like to say about what you hope viewers will take away from what we talked about today?
I feel like the main thing I want people to take away, I want to live in a society where less aggressive assumptions are made. And I don't mean like you see something and you assume that. I mean you assume people do and act in a certain way. So and that can go with so many things, like assuming if someone does this job that they're smart or dumb. If someone's in this area of town, they're a criminal or they work hard. Yeah, and that can go with, you know, people assume if they're trying to get to, you hear it a lot when people are trying to get to know someone or they make small talk, because their assumption is you're heterosexual until you say otherwise. That's one example. So they'll be like, oh, you have a girlfriend, or for me, you have a boyfriend, you know? And people do it to children too, like when they're 4 or 5. Like, it could be a 4 or 5-year-old boy, and they're like, oh, is she your girlfriend? And it's like, you don't, like, it's not gross. It's just like, you know, that's just a really small way to push that expectation on a kid. And there's all kinds of assumptions that are made about people every day when you're trying to talk to them, but also when you learn things about them, then you assume other things. And while I've heard some people say that's just human nature, I do feel like a lot of it's taught. It's taught because we are taught that that is a pattern when it's not necessarily. So when you are learning about people, try to actually learn about them rather than assume you know things about them.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, I wonder if everyone could be who they are meant to be, how interesting the world would be for all of us. So we're called the Confession Box. So if you would like to open up the confession box and pull out a word, look at it, and then show it to us, and then talk about how perhaps that relates to anything we've talked about today.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was like a hinge lid. Hopeful. I'm definitely hopeful because I see shifts and changes in myself, but also in I feel like it's more of like just general community, but you know, it's really easy to get in your own bubble and think everyone like, oh yeah, everything's changing, when you may just be around a lot of people that feel the same way. Because I know there's spaces I've been in recently where, and will be soon, that's, you know, not the case. I know I certainly couldn't have this conversation at, around certain family members at a family reunion I have coming up. I could try, but I feel like they wouldn't even really be interested in the conversation. They'd be like, oh, it's too much, it's too complicated. But to me, it feels like, I honestly attribute a large part of this to BLM, because that being so huge, I feel like it got so many conversations happening that a lot of people who were passive or uncomfortable learned some about how to be a decent ally. They learned how to listen. They learned how to take on that discussion or other people's oppression and deal with their own guilt of whatever, however it related to them. And I feel like it's made it easier for them to do that in other discussions as well. So I feel like it's just kind of generally changed the mindset of a significant portion of the population. I am hopeful that we're moving in a direction where people, like I had said before, actually are learning about each other rather than just trying to categorize each other. And people, yeah, we have a habit of making boxes, but we don't need them. We do not need them. We just feel more comfortable that way. And I think it's a little ironic that a lot of the groups or even generations that talk about people not connecting because of social media or being in their phones all the time is generally the same circles that need to put people in so many restrictive boxes rather than just learning about people. But generally, I feel like I've seen a big shift in myself, but also in even family, like older family, my grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, like not everyone, but like a good portion of us were having conversations we would not have had 4 or 5 years ago. And I think some of that's just with time and us growing up and being able to have those conversations. But also, I really think that the Black Lives Matter movement and revolution, worldwide revolution that happened in the summer of 2020 just got a lot of people to learn how to listen and to learn how to grow and educate and change. So hopefully that continues.
I agree, and that makes me hopeful as well. So now that you did choose your word, are you, and we related it to what we talked about, do you think that you're ready to close this particular chapter by putting it back into the confession word box? Or would you like more time to process it, which means you could hold on to it with hopes to revisit it on another day?
I think I'm good with it.
Okay.
I'm gonna put it back.
Thank you. Got it. Thank you again, Emily, for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.